She said that anybody that says that they can teach a creative writing to run from them. Writing is like practicing a craft. You've got to know the fundamentals and keep working at the fundamentals. And the more you read, because reading also is practicing writing. And that's another thing that we let kids know. You get a twofer when you're reading. You're seeing how to punctuate. You're seeing how to write sentences. You're seeing how to write paragraphs. You're seeing what great writers always do and what holds your attention and what they never do.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
So, did RIF exist when you were a kid? Reading is fundamental?
We didn't have RIF, Reading is Fundamental, but we had a series of posters in our libraries in the hallways of our grade school with celebrities on them, like LeVar Burton and Morgan Freeman, posing with their favorite book or whatever, talking about how important reading is to you. Yeah, we had that. I don't remember what it was called, but
yeah, and I don't really remember a lot about RIF, except that it was called RIF, and I think it was essentially a summer reading program,
Mm-hmm.
and there were probably celebrities that talked about it on TV, but that wasn't how I got into reading anyway. How did you get into reading?
I really got into my love of reading through my dad, honestly. My dad and my mom, they were both big readers. We all watched a lot of movies and television together, but if the TV wasn't on, there's a pretty good chance that there was a book in either or both of their hands. And my dad was an avid Stephen King reader. He read every single one of his books, owned multiple copies of several of his books. And when I was 12-ish, I think I got my first book gifted to me, which was his novel, The Green Mile. And it was
that was a serial, right? I mean,
yep, it was a serial,
yeah.
but I got it when it was collected into the hardback novel. And it was the first time I could really connect with my dad over a thing that was just ours, because nobody else in the family was reading him at the time. So from there, I started just down the path of reading as much of Stephen King's books as I possibly could. I read the book It probably at too young of an age, and then read.
It's a nice, easy title, though, when you're a kid.
Right, exactly. And, at a door-stopping 1,138 pages, an easy read for a 12 or 13-year-old, too.
And that is impressive that you remember how many pages it was.
I did. I don't know why that was such a point of pride. Probably because it was the longest book I'd ever read at that point. It's, probably one of the longest books ever written. But, yeah, that's really where I got started reading, is because I wanted to connect with my dad through his love of Stephen King, and that's continued into my 30s. How about you?
You did not have a dog named Cujo, however.
I did not have a dog named Cujo, though. I've still actually have never read Cujo, but it's my plan this year to read the rest of the Stephen King novels that I haven't read. So I've got through 54 now, and there's probably 30 left. I don't know.
Well, so you mentioned your dad, and I can think of a key reason why my dad was also an influence on my reading, and that was I don't know, I must have been about 11 or 12, and he was going through his DIY woodworking phase.
As all dads go through.
Myself excluded, actually.
Oh.
I have
there's
not
still
had
time.
that. Yeah, I guess there is still time. But one of the things I remember him building was built-in bookcases in our family room because we had so many books. There were just books everywhere, and later my parents got divorced, and to this day the house that my dad moved into with my stepmom is still full of books, and my mom's house still full of books. And the thing that I remember is that my parents never discouraged me from picking up a book that might have been age inappropriate. I mean, it wasn't necessarily that the content was inappropriate. It might have been, but there were just some books that no 11-year-old or 12-year-old probably had
Or no business reading.
Yeah, had
really.
no business reading. Right, exactly. Like the biography of some opera singer, which had an interesting cover. Or
your family wasn't a big opera family.
No, not at all. I think it was. I don't know why they had that book, but I remember reading it and doing a book report on it in sixth grade.
We had a lot of books that were just there. Where did they come from? Yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't remember. I don't remember seeing my parents read those books, but there were always books and there were always magazines around, and I imagine you're younger than I am, but not so young that I think we both grew up at a time when there wasn't the option that you could just go sit on the couch and scroll on your phone.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, I had the internet at pretty young of an age, but the internet was still kind of primitive and very different than what it looks like
Well, you had to
today.
be sitting at a computer,
Yeah, I had
too.
to be sitting at a computer. Yeah, I wasn't taking it with me wherever I went. And for sure, like, I kind of miss those days of just preferring to sit down with a novel. I don't know. I do prefer to sit down with a novel, but it's easier to just scroll and, especially after you've had a long day or whatever. But yeah, novels were the thing that kept me company for so many years of my adolescence, my formative years, and so I've carried that love with me through today. And it's still weird to me when I encounter people who are like, yeah, I don't read. It's like, what do you mean? You don't read for pleasure? Like, then I don't know if they think
what do you do with a cereal box in front of you while you're eating breakfast?
Right. Well, now you scroll on Instagram or whatever, right? But yeah, I don't know. Even a bad book is still worth my time, I find.
I will say, and I'm not going to name names here, but a few years ago, God, it was probably 10 years ago at this point, I bought a book at a in fact, I think it was new when I bought it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the history of town baseball teams in Maine.
Oh.
I was in Maine, so that was why it was.
Right.
And it was like this very thorough, like getting heavily into the minutia of every place there were these semi-pro teams or amateur teams in Maine. And it was probably 200 pages, and it could easily, in fairness, it could easily have been about 20 pages. But I made it all the way through that as both a point of pride and I feel like to honor the guy that did all this research. And yeah, you're right. Even a bad book, I have put books down. I don't know about you, but
I've definitely put books down. Usually I'll give a book like 50 pages to wow me, but honestly, I think if your first page isn't incredible, then you haven't done the work. But you talking about picking up that book about Maine baseball teams reminded me of the weirdest place that I've ever found a book. I was going to a friend's house for like their housewarming party in Malone, and we stopped by the liquor store to pick them up a bottle of wine. And
I can't even imagine where this is going.
and then outside on the railing next to the liquor store was a copy of Louis L'Amour's Conager. And I was like, well, this is meant to be. I've got to pick this up and take it home and read it now, which I did, and then subsequently bought a ton of Louis L'Amour books. And they're all like they're dime store paperbacks. If you've read one Louis L'Amour story, I think it's safe to say that you've read most of them. But they're still really entertaining and poetic, and his use of language is admirable. That's why I love books. Like they surprise you. Like, you've been on a kick of watching all of these Christmas movies lately, and like none of them.
Thank you for outing me.
Well, come on, we already talked about it. But like, those are fun and they pass the time, but they don't surprise you. And even a bad book can surprise you. And I think it's really cool that both of us have this shared history where our families really got us into reading.
Yeah, I do remember going over to visit it to play with friends when I was, in fifth, sixth grade, and being surprised when there weren't books every place because it was just such a normal, such a normal part of the backdrop of everyday life.
Yeah, and books. I don't know about you, but like at my house, like we have full bookcases, but then we have piles of books on top of those bookcases, and then I've got a pile of books in my office and another bookcase in my office, and there's a bunch upstairs in our bedroom. Like books are everywhere, even books that I haven't read, told myself I would get around to reading, but still haven't. But yeah, I want them there,
Yeah. So the reason we're having this conversation, besides the fact that we're required to say something before the interview airs on Northwards, is I had a great opportunity the other day to chat with a father and son who have kind of encouraged each other in their love for not just reading but writing as well. This is Gary and Justin Van Riper, who are the father and son authors of a series of kids books for ages like 7 to 12 called The Adirondack Kids. They've been writing these since Justin was like 11 years old.
Wow.
And you'll hear about how the series developed, but they've been writing them for 25 years now at about an average of one book a year. And it was really, both an interesting and somewhat heartwarming story about how this father and son have essentially made a lifetime of memories by sitting down and writing together. I had a chance to talk with them as part of a series that I also host for the Adirondack Experience, the museum at Blue Mountain Lake, where we talk with Adirondack-themed authors. And so our interview today is excerpted from that conversation. You can find a link to the full conversation at ncpr.org/northwards. But we started by having Gary talk about how the series came to be.
Next year is our 25th anniversary for the Adirondack Kids. It was that long ago that I decided, after reading a book, How to Raise a Reader for Life, and discovered that young people tended to drop out of reading in fourth grade and ninth grade, boys before girls, that while I had read to Justin pretty much every day of his life from the time he was an infant, I was concerned because in third grade and he's getting that danger time. So I decided to ratchet things up a little bit and asked him if he'd like to write a little story together for fun. He said, sure.
Indeed.
If he could be in it. So, we have a camp that's been in my wife's family for over 100 years on Fourth Lake in the West Central Adirondacks. So we decided, set a story in the Adirondacks. He got to be a character in it. I was asked to read at a Parents as Reading Partners program, PARP at the time it was called. Now it's like Pick a Reading Partner or something like that. And I said to Justin, instead of reading something else that somebody else had written, I was asked to read because I had a community newspaper at the time. I said, why don't we share what we've been writing? And so he introduced the characters and I read. And one of the parents came up afterwards and said, when's your book coming out? And we weren't even thinking about that, but got serious about it. And took about a year. And I took my coaching money. I was coaching basketball at high school at the time, and invested in 2,000 copies, print copies of the Adirondack Kids #1. Actually put a 1 on it, not even knowing at that point if anybody'd even buy one, honestly.
Risky.
Very risky. Yeah. So that this pallet comes off the back of a truck in front of our house, and we bring him in, set him in the middle of the living room, and my wife goes, okay, now what? We had a book signing in a little independent store, and then we had one at Borders when they were still in Syracuse and when they were still a chain. And there were over 100 people in line at that particular event, and those 2,000 books were gone in about 3 months.
Did you raise the price?
So then we decided the second book went well, and then we just did one book a year for 20 years and up to COVID. And we kind of stopped like everybody stopped at that point. But we've sold over 180,000 copies in the series so far over that period of time. And number 21 just came out 2 months ago.
Yeah.
2 months ago. Yeah.
Let me jump in for a second, because the initial idea was to make sure, Justin, you kept reading. Did it work?
Yeah. So I did take a little bit of a hiatus when I was, a punk teenager, but it didn't last long. I have always loved stories and reading, as well as film. And so a lot of that, obviously stemmed from when I was young. And that's carried on into the future. I don't read nearly as much fiction as I used to, but I still do a lot of reading. I love reading. I do a lot of writing. And and it's been a blast. And now my son loves reading, and he loves stories, and really enjoying passing that down, because one of the things we talk about whenever we go to schools, how important it is for people to understand how to read and write well, not just if they want to be an author one day, but because it translates to pretty much every area of your life. We tell kids, whatever it is they end up wanting to do, even in my industry. So I work in IT and cybersecurity. I still have to write for my job. Like, there's never an instance where you're not going to have to use language, and the better you are at that, the better you're going to be at whatever you do. So we really stress the importance of reading and writing, and particularly a love for those things, because of how impactful it is on someone's life.
Do the two of you remember what it felt like to have gotten this first book out into the world, and then you show up at a book reading and signing, and there are 100 people lined up to get their copies signed?
So I was a little nervous. They had us
And you were how old at this point?
uh 11. I think I was yeah, I just turned 11. Um, and they had asked us to we were reading or speaking or something. We were going to read a chapter if I remember. And so they asked me to stand up and say something, and I'm all timid and nervous and awkward, and it was an uncomfortable moment. But as the years went on, going to schools and things like that, I got very comfortable to the point where, as a young teenager, preteen kind of age, I was too comfortable in front of the audience, and and I would tell kids, oh yeah, me and my parents get in fights all the time, and about writing, and they're like, no, we got to find a better way to present yourself a little bit.
Editorial disagreement.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what we have.
So there's a learning curve with all those things and all the things involved with being a kid and trying to do normal life stuff as well. But yeah, it was a nerve-wracking experience at first, but it's only been to my benefit over these years. Being able to speak, public speaking, and things like that have been really helpful in my career and in our lives.
Yeah, I think it was the moment when in one of the I think it was at a teachers conference or a writers conference, something like that. And Justin was, talking just very normally. And while he's talking, he's stretching. He was so comfortable, right? So we talked about that afterwards. Let's just talk a little bit more about, stage presence.
It's those moments, when you're laying in bed at night and you think back about those awkward moments in your life and it makes you cringe. It's like, why did I ever do that? Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there's also honestly tender moments too, when with the memories. And at one point, Justin said, "You know what, Dad? It's a little bit mushy. Maybe you won't, mention those publicly." But it was just.
But here we are.
Yeah, but here we are. Yeah. But a lot of parents, dads, they play catch, and we did. We did things father and son would do. This was just part of our lifestyle, to do some writing, one a year, and we just kind of knew we had kind of a schedule, and
Can you paint a picture what writing for the two of you looked like and felt like? Because it's one thing to say that you collaborate on these things, but bring us inside your house from 20 or 25 years ago when the creative process was happening.
So it's changed every single year depending on our life circumstances. As a kid, I would sit right next to my dad in the corner over here on the computer, and we'd be talking about what we wanted to write, and then he'd write it out, and I'd stop him every 10 seconds. Every time he misspelled something. Sure, was maddening. But I'm grateful he has the patience of a saint.
Levi's doing that right now.
Yeah.
Must be a genetic thing.
Yeah. But we would sit there and we'd write through the story together, and we tell people that, like, he would write a word that was real long, and I'd say, "Dad, my friends aren't going to understand what that means," and he'd say, "Well, come up with a synonym," right? And so we'd work through the story together that way. And as I got older, there'd be different types of involvement. At one point, we did a collection of short stories for our one of our books, our 15th book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 5 stories in it, and I wrote 2 of them. He wrote 3 of them. And then other stories have been primarily written by him, and I've just been sort of a collaborative, creative mind on the work, but helping with research and things like that. But just because of my work and things like that, I just haven't been able to write directly with him for several books. So on the bottom we'll say, like, created by Justin and Gary, story by Gary, things like that. So it's just changed depending on the year. And I have 2 children now and 1 on the way, and so things are a little bit crazy. Just the way life is.
Really, we'd sit down and brainstorm and go, okay, well, how's this story going to go? And we know how a story is going to begin and end before we even sit down at the computer and have a good idea of how we're going to get there. So that's all part of the process as well. Deciding what we want to write about, doing the research, and then working on our outline, any new characters that might come in, so that they're real to the readers, so they're real to us, so they're real to the readers, and then actually do the grunt work of writing and then proofing as well.
Well, speaking of the characters, for folks who might not be familiar with the Adirondack Kids series, can you paint a picture of your protagonists?
Yeah.
So the main character was originally based on myself, Justin. like my dad already mentioned, when I was, you know, 9, 10 years old, when we started talking about the books, I thought, hey, how cool would it be if we're ever famous, right? That I could be in a book. And so we created the character Justin, Justin Robert. My middle name is Robert, and so he was a character loosely based on myself. We had a lot of things in common: love for the outdoors, love for the Adirondacks, love for animals, love for Reese's peanut butter cups, right? And so we and I yeah I we have bucket. Oh no, he's got some, right? Yeah. For whatever reason, as a kid, I thought, oh, these hats are pretty cool. Let me get these. Let me get a couple of bucket hats here. And so I had a collection of bucket hats that I used. And then we wanted a character who's going to be humorous. So we created this character, Nick. He loves eating. He loves food. He loves pirates, and he would often drop his fishing pole into the lake and do all kinds of things, messing up words when he's speaking. And so we love to laugh. We've done tons of laughing in our day. So um, we thought we have to bring some comedy to the story. So we created Nick, and then Jackie. We wanted not just boys to read our stories, but girls too. And so we created the character Jackie, who's she's a very outdoorsy, very capable, very smart young girl, and they're best friends. And then of course we have the cat Dax, short for Adirondacks, that everybody loves. And we actually did have a real Dax for 17 years. And so, yeah, Dax was a wonderful addition to the family for a long time. And so, yeah, and people always ask us, are the characters real? And we have to tell them, unfortunately, no. We did make up these characters, but part of the process of writing is knowing these characters so well that when people read them, they feel like they're real, right? So we have information about these characters that nobody will ever know, because we know them so well. They're like real people to us.
It's interesting. The writing effort is a family affair, and I would imagine that these characters really feel like family to you at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mitch, years ago, I remembered hearing authors talking about characters writing themselves. And I was trying to imagine that. And I was always nonfiction oriented. When I started writing with Justin, I didn't even know if I could do fiction. What I found was because I was so nonfiction oriented, had a community newspaper co-owned for 7 years, and you know, but that helped keep the fiction plausible. And so it was a happy learning experience, to find out. And then the characters, like Justin was saying, we got to know them so well that eventually, when they were in a situation and they were interacting with each other, we knew what they were going to say to each other and what they were going to do. So it was just really cool to make that discovery, and now to sit down, we wonder what Jackie and Nick and Justin are up to, and we're sitting down for the next story.
We have not really talked about this latest book. I was hoping you might share just a little bit about the Most Marvelous Moose Call contest, which is, of course, based on an actual event.
Yeah. So just before COVID, this was going to be somebody that followed us around. Wonderful family.
That sounds
What?
creepy when you say it.
Well, wonderful family, and they have a camp in Indian Lake, and they told us about this moose contest that we had never heard about, and the Great Adirondack Moose Festival. So they said, you might really want to come to that. Maybe you'd do a story on it. So we went the year before COVID, and it was a riot. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And it's like, yeah, there's definitely a story here. Well, then COVID hit, and what are we, 2 years out now, 2024? So my wife and I went again, and really connected with Ed Cons, who's fantastic person and guide, and knowledgeable about natural history and all the rest of it, and is a host of that event. And once again, my wife hadn't seen it the first time. She goes, "That was an absolute riot, right?" So took more notes, took more photographs, spent a little more time in the community. So we had 2 research times there, and then got to work on the story. So finally, this was the results of it finally coming out. And we went to the Great Adirondack Moose Festival, set up as vendors, because now we had the book, another book on moose. We had 2 books on moose, and went.
And then I gather life imitated fiction, right?
Well, that's literally what happened.
Ed approached us and said, "Hey, we haven't had a lot of people sign up for the contest this year to participate.
They have a children's and an adult version."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we said, well, no way. we're not doing that. We've never done." And he was like, "Oh no, please, you got to help us out. Like
He was
at the very
gracious.
least,
Yeah.
yeah, at the very least, it'll be entertaining and so come on up, like please, please." As we said, "Okay, all right,
He
we'll
didn't,
do it.
he didn't
We'll
beg.
do it." No, he
He
didn't
didn't
beg,
beg. He
but
said, I don't want to twist your arm, but could you?
yeah, yeah. And so we sat there and while they were talking and doing the introduction, we were practicing in our seat next to us.
Get the video
The
going.
video is going with moose calls.
I go, what does a moose sound like?
Yeah, we have no idea. And so we're practicing, in the seat right next to each other. And finally he calls us up. My dad goes up and then I go up after that. And at the end there when several other people went out, several people did sign up actually. We were not the only ones. And so several other people went and we were like, "Oh, they did way better than us. They
That one
they
girl
were
was sounded
excellent."
just
Yeah.
like the video. Yeah.
And so they get to the end when they're announcing the winners and they do third place and then they do second place and my dad gets called up for second place. And
Ta-da!
so we're like, "Holy
Look what I
smokes,
got.
how great is that?" That's wonderful. And then they call first place and then they called me up. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
So people are going to say this was fixed.
They're gonna think it's rigged.
It was rigged.
Yeah. So yeah, we won first and second at the Moose Call contest.
I want to
Which was
encourage
fun. Yeah.
anybody, Mitch, that's listening though, or comes across the interview here, to go next year
It's
or,
so
or
much
go.
fun. Yeah.
Every participant got one. Whoops, here we go. Well, every participant got one here, one of these nice medals, one of these nice medals here as well, just for participating. They do a great job, and Ed does a phenomenal job with it. But
It was a great
yeah,
time.
So now you have this additional street cred that if the writing thing doesn't work out, you always have moose calling to fall back on.
yeah, but Justin mentioned earlier about the loon call contest at our Adirondack Kids Day, and we had three judges, one of which was a retired ranger. And we told that little story of what happened at the moose call contest. And a woman came up afterwards and said, "Oh, you've got to do a moose call for me." And it's been several weeks now. I don't have the videos. So so I do the little moose call, right? And turning red. And she leaves, and the ranger looks at me and goes, "And you won with that?" I said, "Well, something like that. It was something like that."
So I should not ask you to do your moose call now? Is that what you're
That
saying?
was the method to my madness there. Yeah, just no question on. Let's hear the moose.
You mentioned early on that teaching kids the importance of being a good storyteller, being able to write is one of the goals of what you do. And I know a lot of writers and artists talk about the importance of failure when they're pursuing an art form. How do you teach young people to embrace just the work, the joy of just doing the writing versus the output, and to take comfort in the process rather than winning awards for their finished work?
Yeah, teachers do all the grunt work, right? I mean, when we go into school to speak, we get to do kind of the fun stuff, right? And we do. We just try to inspire. We try to, well, it's real. I mean, we're telling the truth, right? About the writing process and what it can be, and what it can look like. But yeah, we don't spare the fact that there's grunt work involved too. We like to talk about what's the glue we talk
Yeah,
about?
yeah. We regularly give an illustration to kids that they're going to go home after school, and a lot of times they'll sit and they'll watch TV for half an hour or whatever, and we'll tell them like, if you take that half an hour before you sit down and watch TV to sit down in your chair and write, what are you going to have after 3 months? And we tell them they need to go to the hardware store and get a tube of butt glue that they can put in their chair, and it dissolves after 30 minutes of writing, and then they can
Yeah.
get up and go play with their friends, and that always gets a chuckle. But yeah, it's important. They need if they want to accomplish something like writing a book, it's going to take time and effort, and they have to dedicate time each day, or several times a week at least, to getting those things done. Because otherwise, they won't
And it can
they
be
won't get it done.
poetry, it can be song lyrics, it can be
Drawing
a short
illustrations,
story,
yeah.
it can be, it's not just writing a book, there's so many different ways to use writing. And like Justin said, after a couple of months, if you just took a few minutes a day, what do you have to show for it versus sitting and watching a rerun, on television show or something after 3 months, that kind of thing. It resonates with some and, not with others, but that's what we try to encourage.
Well, and Justin, do you feel like doing this when you were a young person gave you a leg up in your ability to succeed in school? Did you feel like you already knew something about narrative when you got to high school and suddenly you were assigned to do this and not just doing
Yeah.
it with your dad?
So my dad's a type A personality, and I am a type B personality. And so I do not have the same high intensity work ethic that he does with certain things. Um, I do in some things, but not another thing. He'll do it with everything. Um, but that definitely helped. So when I was in elementary school and middle school, when we would do writing, after our books came out, my teachers would allow me to do more advanced writing in my stories than my peers, which was nice, because it allowed me to be a little bit more creative and things like that. But then when I got older in my college years, for example, I would always, and I don't recommend this, but I would always wait till pretty much the last possible hour before something was due, an essay was due of some sort. And then I would finally hammer it out, and I always got an A or a B plus or an A plus even. It was not difficult to do the writing portions of things at all. Now I'm not gifted in math and engineering, things like that. I'm terrible at that. But with regard to the reading and the writing things that were assigned to me, or in terms of my jobs when I've had to write for work and things like that, it's definitely been a tremendous help, because it's a lot more second nature now. It's like riding a bike, when something needs to get done, and it's not going to come out like crap after only spending a few minutes on it. So yeah, it's been a huge help.
Well, and Gary, you were talking just a minute ago about the idea that, it's important to just do this as a practice. And you said you were a basketball coach. And, in a lot of ways, people talk about writing as exercising a certain muscle in your brain, and that must have translated to some degree for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Discipline, right? And actually, Madeline L'Engle, another great writer, right? Wrinkle in Time and just so many books. Um, she said that anybody that says that they can teach a creative writing to run from them. She said it's like writing is like practicing a craft. You've got to, know the fundamentals and keep working at the fundamentals. When I read Annie Dillard and I find out she's a technical writer, I mean, it's so fluid. It just, her descriptions and stuff, it's incredible. But then to find out she works in a very technical way, so yeah, it's like any craft, and the more you do it and the more you read, because reading also is practicing writing. And that's another thing that we let kids know. You get a twofer when you're reading because, you're not only reading about the subject or enjoying a story or whatever, but you're also practicing writing. You're seeing how to punctuate, you're seeing how to write sentences, you're seeing how to write paragraphs. You're seeing what great writers always do and what holds your attention and what they never do. So, yeah, reading and just practicing the craft over time.
We tell them that these are all writers' workshops that they can get from their library.
Yeah.
Well, and along those lines, I mean, I think a lot of people might recognize the Hardy Boys series over your left shoulder there, Justin. But there are a lot of other books, and I gather there are quite a few other children's book characters who have spent some time in the Adirondacks that either directly inspire or certainly, kind of underpin what happens in these Adirondack kids books.
When we started, well, maybe 2 or 3 years after writing, I wondered how many other children's books were set in the Adirondacks, or the Adirondacks get a shout out in their work. And then I discovered that the Hardy Boys have been in the Adirondacks. Tom Swift has been in the Adirondacks. Nancy Drew has been in the Adirondacks. The Boxcar Children have been in the Adirondacks. And Samantha of the American Girl series, Samantha Saves the Day, and The Cry of the Loon, also set in the Adirondacks. This character, and this book actually has a nonfiction section at the end, and it's got photographs courtesy of the Adirondack Museum. I have about 150 books, children's books set in the Adirondacks from the late 1800s, every decade unto now. So I was amazed to find, that many books set in the Adirondacks, children's
Wow.
books set in the Adirondacks. Very cool.
You mentioned just a second ago the little nonfiction section at the end of the American Girl book. There are likewise nonfiction sections in your books as well. What is it? Why is it important to have these kind of, I don't know, reframings of the stories in the last 30 or 40 pages of your books?
Yeah, well, each of our stories is set around a real person, place, or thing, which I imagine is why a lot of schools like to use our books in their fourth and fifth grade curriculums. And so we decided when we wrote our book that it would be helpful to have a section in the back. We call it Dax Facts. And we talk about uh, the things that we wrote about. We put real facts that people can check out about the things that we've written. And it helps educate the people. When we did book number one, we had a 35 millimeter film camera be used. And of course, no one on planet Earth knows what that is now unless they're into photography. And so we put a section in the back, talking about film cameras and things like that. So it's a way to not only teach about what's going on in the stories, but just teaching about the Adirondacks and nature and all these things that we care so much about.
As the years went by, people were telling us that they were planning their vacations around stories in the book to go and visit the places, And over time, things have changed here and there, around the park. But yeah, it's been a wild, wild, wild ride. Yeah.
As writers, that must be a really powerful feeling to realize that you've not just entertained somebody for, a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 nights of reading, but you've also influenced things that they didn't know they were interested in until they read them.
Honestly, been very humbling. Seriously,
Yeah.
some of the mail we get and where people have visited and experiences they've had with their kids and their grandkids, and they write to us and tell us about it. And you know, it's very humbling. Yeah.
Speaking of grandkids, I believe there is one in the green room as we're having this conversation
Yeah.
There
who
is.
might get co-author credit on the next
Yeah.
book.
So my son, Levi Judah Van Riper, is 8 years old, and Levi saw a PBS event that my dad and I did on TV, and he said, "I'm going to write a story with you, just like you did with my dad." And so he decided to do that. This is Levi.
Hey,
Um,
Levi.
Levi, why don't you tell them about the story that you are writing with
How it
Papa?
started.
Yes. So we're probably
Do you
gonna.
have it? Let me ask you the important thing. Does it have a title yet?
Yes. In fact, I got the page right here to not forget. um, Chonky the Space Seal, Special Agent Investigator with the Epsilon Eridani Space Force. The frightful flight of the Friendship spaceship. So far is
It's a
what we
working
got.
title.
And
Yes.
this sounds like it might not take place in the Adirondacks.
Yes. No, it does not. In fact, it takes place in, guess what?
Outer space?
Outer space. Yes, outer space. And all of the things that kind of started it, I'm gonna go get the thing that actually started it. So this is a imaginative structure for young storytellers.
It's basically a card
It's
game.
full of cards, and you kind of roll that dice, and it kind of tells you what section and what animal you're gonna get to kind of start your pretend story. We did like a page, like a tiny page of the start of a story. It was nothing like what we have now, but that is what started it.
Well, and is it fun to work with your grandpa on the story?
Yes, yes, very. We got all the writing done, basically. We're just waiting for the illustrations to come in.
Now, how much do you tell him what to write, and how much does he tell you what to write?
Well, earlier my dad was saying he used to tell Papa when he did something incorrect or wrote a word incorrect. Every 10 seconds, he yelled at him. I'm the exact same way. I do that all the time too. Whenever.
So you're a pretty good speller then?
Well, no. I used little red underliner that is under words when you spell them incorrectly.
Oh, nice.
Tell them.
So you're going to be a published author when you're 8 years old.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Really weird to think about, honestly.
Did either of you ever expect when you sat down to write Adirondack Kids #1 that you would still be talking about this 25 years later?
Not a chance. I mean, we did risk it, right? We put a 1 on the side of the first one, so we figured we're at least committed to a sequel. But to do one a year for as long as we have, and to have sold over 170 something thousand books, and it's just been totally unexpected and a huge blessing. We're very grateful.
It is amazing to think, and I know your earliest readers have grown up and gotten through college and are having kids of their own, and
we meet them. We get to meet them. I mean, they'll come up to us, and do selfies with us.
Wow.
I read your books. I read that one, or they'll buy the book for their young one. Yeah, it's been.
This is the real Justin. He's here.
Yep.
Gary and Justin Van Riper, it has been a real delight to chat with you. Congratulations on this latest book. And Levi, congratulations to you on the book that's coming out soon. And I bet it'll be neat to be able to bring that book into to show your friends.
Yeah, it's going to be.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Thanks for having us.
Gary and Justin Van Riper are the authors of the Adirondack Kids series, which is into its 21st book, which just came out a couple of months ago. I spoke with them as part of a series I do called the In the Adirondack Library series for the ADKX, the Adirondack Experience Museum at Blue Mountain Lake. You can find a link to that full interview and everything you wanted to know about the Adirondack Kids series at ncpr.org/northwards. Ethan Shanty, who joined us for our conversation at the beginning of our interview, is back now with a list of all the people that make this show possible.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. Make sure you follow this show wherever you get your podcasts, and you can support Northwards by visiting ncpr.org/give. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.